From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
A new proposal wants you to stub out that cigarette the next time you hit the casino floor. Plus, taking concerns over the southern border to the Kansas State House. But first, a new day for Kansas school funding as the state Supreme Court says we're out of it for now. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Good afternoon and welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, your host. The Kansas Supreme Court this week announced it's closing the latest school funding lawsuit after 5 years of monitoring the state's response to its ruling. The Kansas Supreme Court has released jurisdiction in the school funding lawsuit Gannon v. the State of Kansas. In their order, the justices wrote, given the court's stated purpose was to ensure implementation of the phased-in amounts, and that has occurred, a majority of the court grants the state's motion. The state had argued it has now made the payments it promised in the ruling against it and should be let off the hook. The plaintiffs who filed suit said no one can know whether these amounts are actually sufficient. Justice Rosen dissented based on the legislative history of school funding. Justice DeGaulle did not participate in this ruling. The Gannon v. State series of lawsuits began back in November 2010, when plaintiffs said the state violated Article 6 of the Kansas Constitution by not providing equitable and adequate funding for public K-12 schools. Over the years, the courts repeatedly ruled against the state, and several lawmakers proposed solutions. In May 2019, the state high court accepted a plan that added $622 million to school funding, phased in over the next 4 years. But the court retained jurisdiction in the case, quote, to ensure continued compliance. The court, in retaining such jurisdiction, noted that it has the inherent power to impose remedies and otherwise enforce its holdings. This week, the Kansas Supreme Court released that jurisdiction, allowing lawmakers to once again decide how much money to put into your child's school each year and when, without interference. In response, the governor released a written statement saying, quote, the legislature must not take this ruling as license to cut funding from our public schools and crush an entire generation of Kansas students. Our schools have made so much progress over the past 5 years because we've fully funded K-12 education. Our students can't afford to turn back the clock. So what does all this mean for your kids? Well, depends on who you ask. Joining us this week to discuss the options, we've got Republican State Representative Ken Rajas from Agra and Democratic State Representative Casey O'Hibasam from Wichita. Welcome to both of you. And I think that's where we start is what does this ruling really mean for Kansas school kids, for Kansas schools?
It means that the legislature has done its job. They kept their promise. It was a long process to get here, Pilar, but we are there. And I think it's disingenuous to think that we're going to see massive cuts. I think, we know that if big changes happen, we're going to be right back in the courtroom. That does not help Kansas kids. So kudos to the legislature for working together across the aisle to constitutionally fund our K-12 schools. We've got other issues we're continuing to deal with, but I think the Supreme Court did the right thing, and it's good that we are back to seeing trust within at least two branches of government.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with my colleague. I think the legislature has done its job in terms of making sure that schools are adequately funded. I think it's time for the courts to say, that they've done their job, and I don't think that there's going to be massive cuts. But there's still progress that needs to be made. There's still, when it comes to special ed, that's still an area that still needs attention. But that's kind of like a minor, issue that we can actually address. But I think that, yes, we've come to a point that the legislature has done its job. And I'm proud of what we've done in terms of putting more money in education, but there's still those pieces out there that we need to fix, some minor details that, like, I won't say minor, but, an issue that's been there for a while, which is like special ed and other things. So I'm happy with the decision that the Supreme Court has made.
Oh, the governor, of course, warning against incoming cuts. I heard from a lot of parents and public school advocates who are very concerned about what this means with the courts taking themselves out of the issue at this point. That they said, we've seen it before, we're afraid we're going to see it again. The legislature is going to come up against a wall, and the first thing they're going to start cutting is schools.
Well, and okay, and I get that, but let's look at it. Between K through 12 education funding and social services, that is the majority of the budget of the state of Kansas. And we don't know what the economy is going to do. Will we see a downturn here in Kansas? That's up for debate, probably for another show. But I think, we all, as I've said, we don't want to get back in the position of money going to attorneys rather than in the classroom. So I think maybe let's let this work out. There has been no discussion of cuts in this legislative cycle. And so, I think, we'll see. A lot of programs, when you run into financial squeezes, you have to make choices. And to say that one, to go would get us in trouble, I think would be something we'd really have to take a serious look at. Because there's a lot of other programs that people would say are very valuable and very much needed for Kansans. So let's play out for a little bit before we all of a sudden 2 or 3 days afterwards we go, well, this is it, this is over. I think again, let's work together as kind of as a team between all of us.
I totally agree. I mean, we've not seen no major cuts have been announced with respect to this legislature. At the same time, we have to make sure that we have to make a commitment that public money stays in public schools and not necessarily money going towards vouchers. That is something that will actually weaken our school systems throughout our entire state. We need to make sure that we are putting public money in public schools, strengthening our school systems throughout our states, whether it's in urban areas or rural areas.
And I think that will happen. I think, again, that's what the legislative process is. All of us come from all over the state with our ideas on what we think, and in certain areas, those public and private institutions work well. The district I represent, we have very, not one or two that are kind of, K through 6, K through 8. So my deal is maybe a little bit different than some as well. But I think, we continue to have a full vetting process, and I guess whatever have the votes. But I understand what you're saying. To take that other money away from making sure we're constitutionally funding our schools, again, it puts us right back in the courtroom.
In square one. I totally agree with you on that.
And courtrooms are what I hear lawmakers want to avoid on all sorts of fronts.
Yes.
Well, some state lawmakers are throwing their support behind the Texas governor's actions to stop the influx of immigrants crossing the border from Mexico. They're calling it an invasion and want Governor Laura Kelly to send help to Texas. Rebecca Chung with the KSN Capitol Bureau was at the State House for the debate on this topic.
Yeah, it's a controversial issue here at the State House. Lawmakers going back and forth over whether the state should step in to help with the southern border. Kansas Republicans are calling on Governor Laura Kelly to send troops to Texas.
This is an invasion, folks. This is an invasion.
A fight for control at the border is underway, and Republican lawmakers are siding with Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
It's clear that the federal government has failed in its responsibility under the U.S. Constitution to defend the states from invasion.
The legislation is there. The statutes are there. They have not done it, and so it's our turn.
Abbott installed wire at the border in an effort to prevent illegal crossings. This sparked a conflict with the feds. They say it prevents agents from reaching migrants in distress.
Frankly, I'm appalled at some of the political games that we play with people's lives.
And Kansas Democrats agree.
I support the humane treatment of people. I support responsible handling of this migrant crisis, but I cannot support this resolution.
It is the responsibility of the United States Congress and the President to protect our borders.
And Governor Kelly responded to the issue saying, quote, the National Guard at the state level, I'm the commander in chief, but when they go to the border, they're federalized, and they're actually responding to the president at that point, and the border issue is a federal issue. So if the president decides to federalize some Kansas troops, then they will go. And that really, I have been hearing from viewers about this particular issue and wanting to know where the governor stands on it for a couple of weeks now, increasingly so. Are you guys hearing as well from constituents?
Well, my constituents who contacted me have always said that with respect to the border, this is a federal issue. It's not a state issue. Now, if there are people who are upset with what's going on, I mean, what they should do is contact their members of Congress and tell them to fix the border issue going on right now. Sending troops down there, National Guard troops down there, it only takes away resources from us being here in Kansas. It's not a state issue. it's a federal issue, and it should be solved at the federal level. So that's what I've been hearing. Let the federal government handle, and let us in Topeka handle state issues.
What about
With
you,
all
Ken?
due respect, if the federal government would have handled the issue, this wouldn't be an issue. Many states, many governors, Republican governors, throwing their support behind Governor Abbott and the Texas National Guard. And we as a legislature felt we need to do something. We were getting many calls, texts, emails. Why aren't we sending National Guard troops to the border? Well, one, legislature cannot tell the Congress what to do. The governor's right. She's the commander-in-chief. But what can we do? This is what we can do, at least show our support that as a legislature, the majority of the legislature is supportive of what they're trying to do. I do agree and I do understand, but there are so many things broken. The immigration situation is broken and nobody wants to fix it. Nobody wants to fix it because we also have issues with the agriculture workers. And even to try to get that, which you would think would be a little simpler, but it's become political. And it's an election year. And so I don't see this is going to be fixed. So what we do, this and other issues, the states should not be doing things. But if the federal government is not going to act, we have a responsibility to our constituents and to Kansans that want us to do what we can, and this is what we can do.
And to be clear, this is a resolution. Resolutions do not have any power behind them. It's just kind of the legislature saying, this is what we think.
Absolutely. I mean,
correct.
that's what it is. It just shows that we're aware, we're doing what we can. We're not stopping short because all we can do is this. And again, continue to have conversations with the governor. And if the governor chooses to do that, more power to her. But the way she has said is that this is a federal issue, and the way she thinks that the Guard will be handled. Other states have done it, it's unfortunate maybe that we don't. And now I do understand sending troops there, some of our guardsmen and guardswomen, and the things that they do to not be here if we have an emergency or a natural disaster. I understand that, but we still have our guardsmen in other places as well, trying to when they're called into action. So. Let's hope we get DC back in order so we can actually get some things done. But that's even difficult. I wish we could do a resolution to tell Congress to get their act in order.
I'm pretty sure you can,
I know.
actually.
Yeah, I guess we do every 2 years. Yes.
There you go.
That's a good one.
Well, the state's Indoor Clean Air Act prohibited smoking in restaurants, bars, and most workplaces over a decade ago. But to date, the state's gambling industry has opposed any effort to add casinos to that list. Health advocates are trying yet again, though. Rose Conlon from KMUW and the Kansas News Service explains.
Kansas casino worker Joe Halfley supports a smoking ban because secondhand smoke, he says, has contributed to his chronic lung disease.
I am doing this because I have a wife and a son who I want to be there for a very long time.
But casino operators fiercely oppose a ban. Kevin Fowler, an attorney for Kansas Crossing Casino, says it would hurt business and reduce tax revenue.
Our clients are interested in generating revenue, not only for their shareholders, but also for the state of Kansas. That is why we are in business.
He says Kansas could lose customers to casinos in Oklahoma and Missouri, which allow smoking. Nebraska and Colorado have banned casino smoking. For the Kansas News Service, I'm Rose Conlon in Wichita.
So I'm going to start with this. How much of a chance, it's been a decade, does this bill have? Because I get calls from viewers all the time. I do a segment over at my other job called Ask Me Anything, and that's probably the most common question I get. Why is smoking allowed on the casino floor?
Because it's allowed. No. Well, I think it's allowed because the law allows for it. Now, I understand, some of the people behind respect to trying to ban smoking in casinos. I get that argument. I know everyone's trying to make sure that we live or anybody who wants to go into a building, it goes into a smoke-free building. But casinos are different. Their atmosphere are different. We'll see. I don't know. In the Fed and State Committee, maybe there's a chance that this bill could get heard. And if it does get heard, some of these proponents of it can come in and testify. The reason why we should have the ban. But the reason why it happens is because the law allows for it to happen. So that's the best I can say on that.
And Mr. Hafley's been in contact with many of us to continue to push this issue, keep it at top of mind awareness. But it's a process, and the way it works, a bill gets introduced, goes to committee, the committee has to work it, and that's what happens. I would guess the likelihood of this moving forward is not very bright, and probably will have to go back and try again next year and eventually get momentum. Again, these are the state-owned casinos that have, we have some on the Indian reservations, and those, we have no jurisdiction over those. Those can do whatever they feel necessary. So, I would guess that it's probably something that continue to work on. There's a process to try to get things done quickly, and any sort of legislation rarely happens. So you continue to build momentum every year. It could be, we had a legislator, it took them 20 years to get something passed. That's persistent.
Persistence sometimes wins the race. Well, several students at Fort Hays State say mold in their dorm is making them sick. KAKE's Stephanie Minichi explains.
Mold found in several dorms at Fort Hays State University may be causing sickness on campus. Freshman Olivia Mancino-Hind moved into the dorms in August.
It was 2 weeks after we moved in. I just started feeling really sick. I had a lot of fatigue, lots of coughing, sinus issues.
Olivia wasn't getting any better. She went to the on-campus doctor and says she was told it's probably allergies. After returning from winter break, she got worse. Olivia says she went to an allergist who called her mom with a terrifying message.
I needed to get out of there because I probably wouldn't get better for another 6 to 12 months. And if I stayed in there, I could go into anaphylactic shock.
Hind says the bathrooms in the dorms are poorly ventilated and there's one dehumidifier per hallway. Olivia's mom, Rachel, says since going public with her daughter's problems, she's heard hundreds of similar stories of kids getting sick.
She's had double ear infections, and then her sister has had to go to emergent care because it was painful for her to breathe. There's another girl who actually is on 2 different types of inhalers.
Rachel says a report from Fort Hays State shows investigators found aspergillus and penicillium in her daughter's dorm.
There's over, I guess, 150 different types of aspergillus, but 40 of them can be very harmful, and the health impacts can range from, bronchitis, pneumonia, where it becomes more invasive. And
Rachel says she reached out to a representative from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment and is waiting for next steps. Stephanie Minichi, KAKE News on your side.
In a statement on Thursday, Fort Hays State says it hired an environmental firm in September to inspect the rooms in the 2 dorms. The university says it cleaned vents and spaces after that inspection. In October, Fort Hays State says a final report from the firm shows it found 2 types of common mold. FHSU is encouraging students who have problems to submit a work order to the school and to go to a doctor if they feel sick. The university says it's talking to the firm about another inspection as soon as next week. KDHE also responded to questions saying it's aware of the issue and is gathering information, but it doesn't deal with environmental mold problems. And I think that's where I want to start with this discussion, because we tend to deal with the bigger picture statewide issues. And we had a similar issue in the Wichita area with apartments recently, and it really comes down to there's nobody who's responsible for regulating issues like this.
And I don't know if it's on the county level or on the state level. There's just miscommunication as to who's responsible. But anytime you have a mold found in any premise, I think that's troubling. Some level of government has to step in to say, this particular residence or business needs to be taken care of in terms of making sure that's actually a healthy place for anyone to be at. So I don't know whether a law needs to be passed in Topeka or ordinance that need to be strengthening on the local level. Something has to be done to make sure that, whether it's on the local level, state level, at least there's some kind of communication between health agencies to notify and people.
I would probably say that's a conversation with KDHE from probably both health and environment, just to say, okay, where why isn't there some sort of a process for this? Now, I will say, we focused a little bit on Fort Hays as kind of the start in this. I've been in touch with President Mason and others. I mean, it's unfortunate. And once they found this out, they jumped into action immediately. And I want to make sure that there's always a process, and it's unfortunate that this young lady, fell ill, and others. And I believe, this student was able to make other arrangements, and so others. And McMidas is one of the oldest dorms now at Fort Hays State, and so I'm sure there'll be more discussions about that. And it's much like an apartment, like any college dorm, and so it's also, I think, a conversation needs to be done on the local level. Again, so much of the time we think that the state or the Fed are the answers. Well, Sedgwick County, say in Wichita, has their own health department, and many counties or municipalities have them. Maybe it's a conversation that needs to happen of how we combat that, because a lot of times that's a bigger picture with health. Could that keep health care costs down if we do see things like mold or things we don't see, and those mold spores are in our air conditioning vents, or maybe that you can't see? So it's probably a broader conversation, and hope it's kind of like be vigilant, be aware. And if you start to feel ill, maybe look into that, or have somebody come out. It could be a homeowner as well. So it probably needs to have some discussion. I think if anybody was really aware, I think we all probably thought, well, somebody has to be, the czar of mold or whatever. So
well, I certainly in the newsroom, that's what we thought when the issues in Wichita came up was, there's got to be somebody, the health department, they handle it. They'll determine if, no, they don't. They specifically said, that's not something that we've been charged with doing. The state hasn't told us it's our job. The city hasn't told us it's our job. We haven't been given any powers to act.
We'll find answers.
I concur on that.
Okay. Well, finally today, a big ruling in a water fight in western Kansas that could keep Kansans in two cities drinking. And KSN reports the towns of Hays and Russell co-own the R9 Ranch in Edwards County. The ranch covers about 6,800 acres and includes 7,647 acre-feet of water rights. That's about 2.5 billion gallons of water. In 2016, city leaders applied for the right to transfer water from the ranch to Hays and Russell. They say it represents the town's most economically viable and drought-resistant long-term water supply. But Hays and Russell have opposition from Edwards County and the Water Protection Association of Central Kansas, or WaterPAC, who don't agree with the amount of water the towns want transferred. On Monday, the towns got a favorable ruling on their application. Judge Matthew Spurgeon, an administrative law judge from the Kansas Office of Administrative Hearings, issued an initial order approving the transfer application. The judge's ruling isn't the final step in the process, though. The Water Transfer Hearing Panel has to review it and issue a final order, most likely in May. And Ken, I'm going to start with you because this is in your backyard to a certain extent. This is a fight you said has been going on for decades.
It's been going on, a fight, if you will, or many years ago, the cities of Hays and Russell said we need a long-term water source. This ranch became available for purchase. They purchased it, and then the process of how do you get the water from there, move those water rights out of irrigation, and a pipeline, getting it in now to those two municipalities. So this was kind of the next step of where we go. Now, absolutely, I understand Edwards County and their concerns and the economic impact that could have on it, but the way I understand it is, that was a transaction, a fair and equitable transaction that was made, and it's been going on all the way. There's been opposition, and through the courts, I don't know how many thousands of dollars was spent on courts trying to get that. But again, the next world war is going to be fought over water. All these other things we talk about, because without water, that's the key to life. Without water, we don't have much of anything. And so I think that's also part of it. We're looking at it, especially those in the western part of the state. Water is not only economy, but it's life. And so how we look at the long term. So this now, we wait for the next step and to see if kind of those are done. But I'm sure this is going to be ongoing until that probably a first tap is done, and who knows even after that, because what I think other places are looking, maybe around the Wichita area, okay, if this is successful, will other municipalities try to do the same thing as they try to find long-term water solutions for growing areas?
And you kind of touched on my next question there, which is this is really a microcosm, an example of not only how big of an issue water rights are now as we're dealing with long-term loss of water underneath Kansas, but also how complex the rules and regulations and laws surrounding water rights are in the state.
The way I'll answer this question is basically, the governor during her State of the State speech called for water conservation. How we actually, or farmers, actually grow their crops and all of that, because they do need water, and water is needed in Western Kansas. We don't want a situation whereby Western Kansas or even northern part of Kansas to dry out. We have to be more. There has to be a lot more emphasis on conservation. So
another issue was Caney. Caney ran out of water.
Yeah.
And that's a different part of the state, and so and again in other places, and so and I think there's a water committee in the House that is looking at all these issues, not just agriculture and irrigation, but how it affects municipalities, industry, and the whole situation. So looking at all, and it is, you're exactly right. Water is complex, and I guess it's probably complex for a reason. But one of the things we do have in Kansas is we have a great, rich history of where we know water and probably better records than almost any state as far as who has it, use, and so on. We just want to make sure that we don't pit one segment of water use against another.
No. And it's interesting you bring up Caney, because their issues started about a year or so ago with drought conditions, the river running too low, and so they were bringing in silt, not just water, into their system, and that clogged up the system. Now they're dealing with just, it's an old system and it's dying out and parts are breaking and it's constantly breaking down, and they're not alone in that. A lot of Kansas towns are facing this infrastructure deterioration.
And the legislature is working on that. There's some federal programs, but also the state is looking at that, of how to help these very small towns, like towns, many times I represent, town I live close to try to help them with these aged systems.
And we're going to have to leave that right there. Thank you both so much. We are out of time. We'd also like to thank our news partners at the Wichita Eagle, Cake News, and KSN News for sharing their materials with us. For now, stay safe and have a great week.